Square Ball Podcast.
Hello there, welcome to the show. It's brought to you in association with Levi Solicitors, who will offer you what, Michael?
Discounts on legal services.
Yes, he's getting there. Phil Hayes here with us. We'll speak to Phil in a second about the takeover. We now have White Smoke, which is great news. First up, we need to say you can get a 15% discount on wills, probate and conveyancing.
Big three.
The big three, as Michael describes them, 10% on everything else. Head to levisolicitors.co.uk/Monday Club. That will be getting changed. It is not Monday. We keep reiterating this. But anyway, to business, Phil Hay, and we have White Smoke on the takeover finally. First domino's fallen.
Yeah, we need to call this the early part of the week club, really. Although when the season starts, we will revert to Mondays for sure. It's not even just White Smoke around the takeover, is it? We've got first signing about to go through the door. We've got addition to the technical scouting department in Greta Steinson as well. It was kind of all happening yesterday, and particularly late in the evening. Amid probably the most surprising announcement I've ever seen at Leeds, that Michael Phelps was chucking money in as well, amongst all people.
In at the deep end, and so on and so forth. Sorry for that. Isn't it funny how like the whole mindset of Leeds fans has just shifted now we've finally got some news after all that silence?
Yeah, the peculiarity of the last 2 or 3 weeks is that this has kind of always been coming, if you know what I mean. It was in the background. It was with the EFL. There was never any specific issue or never any hurdle which was going to stop it from happening. It was just the process and the protocol of ticking all the boxes that the EFL insist on making you tick. And for a long period of time, Leeds had no specific timescale for when this was going to end. It wasn't as if it was going to take months and months, but in terms of an exact date or an exact time even, they were waiting as long as we were. But I think the progress with Ethan Ampadu from Chelsea yesterday, the speed at which that got agreed, it wasn't as if Leeds weren't in a position to do deals like that. They could still get the ducks in a row in the way that they did with Daniel Farke. But I think that one in particular coming to fruition for the value that it's going to cost to sign him, it made you think that that something was on the way. But it was still very late last night when it came through. It was about 9 o'clock when Leeds finally got the nod, and then 10:15 when it was publicly announced. So it's been quite a long slog to this point.
We've heard from Andrea Radrizzani and we've heard from Parag Marate. What do you both make of that?
It was interesting to hear Radrizzani expressing some regrets, I suppose, because it's normally been a bit more. I tried my best, but it didn't quite work. Whereas he was attributing a bit of blame this time, partly to himself, but also, "I'm sorry, I trusted you." Was the gist of what he said about Orta, which is, it's sort of taking blame and pushing blame at the very same time, isn't it?
I think probably as close to Orta being thrown under the bus by anyone at Leeds as we've seen. It's funny because I was going back through a few of the interviews that I'd done with Radrizzani over the years. One in 2018 when Bielsa came in that summer, and then again last summer after they avoided relegation. And I think the fact that Orta came up as a point of discussion in both of them, even going back to 2018, tells you that it's been a burning issue right the way through and been a burning topic of discussion. When we interviewed him last summer and asked him about that, we made the point to him that we thought recruitment hadn't been good enough, that the amount that had been spent, and that was the question, £100 million has been spent, it hasn't had the desired effect, or it doesn't seem to have done. And Radrizzani said, when you mentioned about the market, you're right, but I don't think there is a club who nail every single player they purchase. I think we should put a line after 3 to 5 years to see how many players were successful or not, to find the judgment over a period of time. We have cases where maybe the performances have not been at the level of investment. Then we have other cases, the opposite. Ilan Meslier is a fantastic example. So perhaps we are now at the point, relegation behind them and Radrizzani gone, where he can actually take a view on that and he can see that it didn't work. But I think for a lot of people, that's been apparent for quite a while longer. And the fact that Orta is no longer there himself, that all came to an end, tells you pretty clearly that it wasn't working and it didn't work, as does the outcome of last season.
It's the closest we've come to a mea culpa, I think, from Radrizzani, isn't it? Although, like you say, if you do read between the lines, it was very much him chucking Orta under the bus. And it was interesting to draw parallels with what Parag Marate said. He's chatted to Matt Lewis on the official Leeds United podcast, half-an-hour chat that you can see on YouTube and find on the audio channels as well. And it was interesting to hear him. He's very measured, is Marate, isn't it? It was interesting, though, to hear him just place a little bit of distance between himself and Radrizzani's ownership, where he was sort of saying, I shared the frustrations of the fans and I had questions as well, and I was a passenger on this journey, that kind of thing?
I think he probably has to do that. And I think what you'll find with Marathi as he speaks more and more is that he will paint the picture of 49ers enterprises as minority shareholders through that period, as opposed to having massive influence over Radrizzani and being able to ultimately dictate the big decisions. I think you can reasonably counter that by saying that with a very big share in the boardroom, they can't have had no influence at all. But there is a difference between owning the club and being a minority partner. And it is now all on 49ers Enterprises. It is their club. They have a lot to sweep up and a lot to clean up after relegation, which is always the case when you go down. But now the calls become theirs. So, Radrizzani wasn't involved in the interview process for Daniel Farke. He won't have been in any way involved in the decision to bring in Greta Steinson to the technical team. He won't have been in any way involved in the decision to go after Ethan Ampadu at Chelsea. This is your new regime making these decisions. And this is your new regime, I think, trying to do things slightly differently and to approach it in a different way to Radrizzani's methods and Radrizzani's hierarchy. But at the same time, it needs to work, I always find with takeovers, you move very quickly from the ability to blame or to pick fault with what went on previously to people looking at you directly and expecting you to deliver because you're now in charge of the plane, as Marathi puts it. He quite often uses that phrase, the idea that he was on the plane but not actually flying it himself. Well, 100% they are now.
Yeah, and he's gone further than just accepting responsibility for what happens next. He was talking it up, wasn't he? Talking about building a club to be proud of and giving Daniel Farke the tools in the market by getting into the transfer market, building a strong squad, as he described it. And not only that, he looked a couple of steps down the road to potential Premier League return and building a strong squad there for him, giving him the tools that he perhaps lacked at Norwich.
Yeah, again, we've had the issue over the past 3 or 4 weeks of being able to speak about what we understood that the 49ers would try to do, but them not actually speaking for themselves. And through the period where the takeover was pending, them not actually being in a position to do a great deal. So we expected them to go for a head coach who would have experience in the Championship or kind of proven ability to succeed at that level. And we mentioned Farke a lot, and it has been Farke who's been appointed. And we spoke a few times about, and again, he used this phrase, Marathi, about them being aggressive in the transfer window. And that doesn't kind of stand up to scrutiny when nothing is happening. And I know people were frustrated about hearing that in the face of no players arriving. But then the first deal that they do is Ampadu, £7 million rising to 10 from Chelsea. And while over the past 2 or 3 years, we've all got used to £27 million on Rodrigo and £30 million on Jorginho Rutter and loan deals like Weston McKennie's that had that option to bring him in for 30 million plus. This is where they are now. This is them back at a different level and back in a very different market. And I don't know about you, but I think £7 to £10 million is a sizable, chunky investment for a Championship club. There are limits to what you can spend in this division. There are FFP limits that mean that you can't just invest excessively or without restrictions. And it strikes me that in terms of, obviously the window as a whole that'll be the proof will be in that pudding. But it strikes me that as a first deal, Ampadu is a fairly aggressive one.
Makes sense to me. What about you?
I think so, yeah. I did make the mistake of going on a Sheffield United forum and seeing what their fans had to say about him from his time there. But it was admittedly part of an absolutely dismal season for them. It was our season up when they were pretty much out of the running completely by Christmas. They'd already gone, so it was a very bad season he had there.
How old was he then? Was he 19?
Yeah, he was still a teenager at the time, and he was moving position. He was sometimes at centre-back, sometimes in midfield, and it didn't go well from there. But he's played an awful lot of football for a 22-year-old, and he's got about 100 league appearances. He's got 40 Wales caps, so you're getting a lot of experience. But I guess the business model of finding players who can grow with the club and either just improve with us or be sold on, I guess that sort of stays in place.
It does feel to me, Phil, what do you think? Like it's, we said maybe one of the problems with Leeds over the last few years is they were always planning for a future that never arrived, whereas this seems to be a signing. And I won't pretend to know much about him beyond, looking at the odd YouTube clip or whatever. But it seems to be a signing that makes sense for here and now and the level that we're at.
Well, I think Michael got it right with him. He has played a fair amount of football, but he's in this weird position where he's, for example, got an international career with Wales, which isn't far off 50 caps, and has seen some pretty high level football with that World Cup, European Championship. But I think as a domestic player, he's still looking to find himself. He's still looking to find a proper home where he can put down roots. I know he's been at Chelsea for a long, long time. But I was talking to one of our Chelsea writers who was saying that between the season with Mauricio Sarri, where he didn't really play, and then the loan that he had at RB Leipzig, where he didn't really play either, that kind of ended the period of him being seen as a major development project at Chelsea. And it wasn't that there was no prospect at all of him getting in there, but it has been kind of like serial loans for him, season after season. And Michael's right. He's young. He's been at clubs who have been in relegation trouble, not specifically because they've signed him, but because their seasons just did not go well. And also the two moves to Italy and the move to Sheffield United, he was moving to teams who played in a very different way to Chelsea. So no huge amount of continuity there. I think the feeling is that he probably needs a fresh start. And I think it's quite weird to say this because he is so, he played so much at international level. I think he needs a move that is the making of him domestically. And yes, like Michael was right, I think, to say that this is investment in somebody who could grow in the future. But I think the difference is it's being done in the Championship as opposed to the Premier League. And I think if I was looking at this deal in the Premier League, I would be thinking to myself, this is a bit of a punt on somebody who you can't be sure will thrive at this level. Whereas in the Championship, I'm far more inclined to think that it could work.
Dare we say there's a bit of an optimistic air has descended in the last 24 hours after quite a lot of anxiety. Are you optimistic about Leeds United's chances? I mean, it's only one signing, plenty more work to do. But the way that Marate's talking and the arrival of Ampadu, very hot on the heels of getting the green light from the EFL, it bodes well, potentially?
Well, it's certainly the right signs and it's the right noises, although they're going to have to do more than this in order to be as competitive as they want to be. And I'd go back again to retentions as well. I think the retention of certain players is as crucial as the players who they sign. Willie Gnonto was due back in this week. They've not backed some interest from Everton in him and seem really intent on keeping Gnonto if they can. The advantage is that he doesn't have a relegation release clause in his contract, unlike just about everybody else in the squad. There are other exceptions too, but most of them have some provision along those lines. So they can actually control that one. That is a transfer that they can almost do as they please with. Don't get me wrong, it becomes very difficult if Gnonto was to say I want to leave, or if there were offers that were really tempting for him. But again, if you make good signings and if you look like you're being ambitious in the market, existing players will be more tempted to stick around because they'll like the look of it. They'll like the look of what it can become. And I don't imagine there are too many players at Leeds who dislike the idea of going back into the Premier League with Leeds. The question for them is going to be, do they want to have a season in the Championship in the meantime?
In terms of those players we might be looking to keep, the likes of Gnonto and Adams, do you think if they are going to stay, that it's likely to be tied to a new contract for them?
I suspect so with Gnonto, definitely, and potentially with Adams as well. I think there would have to be some carrot with it to persuade them that it was the right thing to do. It's slightly different position for Gnonto to Adams. I think that at different stages of their career, Adams clearly USA captain already and has the World Cup coming up. But I don't necessarily feel that for either of them, a really good season in the Championship, a promotion year in the Championship, would damage them or damage their reputation. I think in actual fact, somebody like Adams being in the thick of that and leading that or being in the middle of it would enhance his reputation. But it's a decision for them to take. And I think the reason why, Adams, Jack Harrison, players like that, it's still difficult to be certain about what's going to happen, is that the transfer market always gets busier and gets hotter in August. And that's when bids start coming. That's when offers are made. That's when clubs tend to offer more as well. And that in no small way will influence what happens here.
Have we had any steer on who might yet stay? Because we've been talking about Sinisterra in recent weeks. You've tweeted about it as well, Phil. He'd basically be a cheat code in the Championship, wouldn't he?
Well, he should be, provided he stays fit. And again, there isn't going to be anybody at Leeds who's objecting to the idea of him sticking around and being involved next season. I think he probably falls into the same category, really, as Harrison and Adams, that it's very possible that there comes a day where you get made an offer that you can't refuse. At the same time, if that doesn't happen, then this probably relates to Marate's comments about being aggressive, that actually, if you've got the opportunity to keep somebody like Sinisterra, you do it. And as you say, he is a huge asset in the Championship. He's the sort of player that most other Championship clubs don't have, or the level of talent that most Championship clubs don't have. And potentially he makes a huge difference. But you know how the market works. I think the unpredictability there means that it's quite hard to guess one way or the other.
It's fair to say that Leeds are going to have to sell some players in order to generate some revenue. Just that it's just the reality of losing, however many 90 million quid or something, 100 million quid from being in the Premier League.
I think they'd minded to take an offer for Meslier, definitely, if they get one that is good enough. I don't think there've been any firm approaches yet, but the fact that they're cracking on with goalkeepers, and that wouldn't surprise me at all if that turns out to be next on the list after Ampadu, makes you realise that they're looking for a change there. I think they also have to cover themselves in the goalkeeping department, because they can't afford a scenario where midway through August a big offer for Meslier suddenly comes in, they sell him, and they have to recruit something else at short notice. I think they want to know before the season starts who the first choice goalkeeper is going to be, ideally. And I still, at the back of my head, I still feel like somebody will test the water with Jack Harrison to an extent which makes it very difficult to keep him. He's a valuable player. He's a player who a lot of Premier League clubs would see value in, would think would do a good job for them. So I do wonder whether at some point in this window he will go.
What sort of level do you think we're talking about? Finger in the air time for this one, because Leeds in the past have been accused of selling players under their true market value. Could we see a shift in approach, and could Leeds, even from this position of weakness, is what I think you're going to go on to say here, aren't you, that we're in the Championship?
What I was going to say is that I don't know what the provision is, but there will almost certainly be a release clause. In fact, there is a release clause of some sort in Jack Harrison's deal, and if it's for a fixed price and a fixed fee, then it doesn't really become about can you get market value for them. These clauses tend to work in a way where if somebody meets the asking price, the player is free to go for that amount of money. So yes, the chances are they wouldn't get. Put it this way, last summer when Newcastle were interested in Harrison, Radrizzani was talking about holding out for £40 million for him. I just don't see any way in which anybody will go to that this summer or have to go to that.
Talking of transfers, Phil, then it leads me on to Greta Steinsen, I believe is the pronunciation. So apologies if I'm getting that wrong. My Icelandic is not that particularly strong. Who came out of the blue, really, as one of the key appointments that the 49ers have made at Ellen Road. And any clarity yet on what his role's going to be? We just know it's going to be somewhere within this new organisation, because we've been talking for the last few weeks, haven't we, about maybe a slightly different approach rather than having it all in one sporting director's hands as it was with Victor Orta.
I'm expecting him to be technical director, and I think that will probably have been confirmed or announced by the time people are listening to this. It's been agreed and it's in place. It's just been properly finalised and sorted out. The thing we'll look for when this is announced and when it's explained is the way in which the technical department, the scouting department, is going to change and what Leeds plan to do to it. Clearly, from 2017 onwards, they've had a director of football in Victor Orta who's had huge amounts of authority and has had a lot of control over recruitment, a lot of control over scouting, has pretty much overseen the whole thing. I think Leeds would like to fragment that more, potentially to reduce the authority that one single person has. And something like Steinsen coming in, he will have scouts around him. I think they will expand the scouting department. It still does leave kind of scope, I think, or space for Leeds to go for a separate director of football, somebody else to help oversee their operations, the football operations, if they want that to happen. And you'll remember that when Nick Hammond was appointed as the interim transfer consultant, short-term contract, and Hammond is still there. He will stay on in the meantime, and I wonder whether if they have a good window, if they might be tempted to stick with him for longer too. But when he came in, the club said that they were looking at a director of football. They were kind of setting the timescale as being September, October time when they would actually make an appointment. So they may well have further ideas in their heads about what they will do beyond this. But in the meantime, Steinsen will arrive as technical director or a title of that sort, and will be involved in recruitment and scouting. He's been at Tottenham for the last season as their performance director. He's had previous jobs at Everton and also Fleetwood Town back in the day. So it seems to be well rated in the game, seems to be well thought of, doesn't strike me at all as a bad appointment.
Sorry if you heard a noise then, by the way, when Phil was talking. We got a plinky plonky noise in our ears, didn't we? We were both baffled by that.
I think it may have been a tab I had up in the background. That's I think the Leeds United ticket site might have just let me in.
So apologies.
It sounded like in the night garden.
Anyway,
dressed up as Macapaka.
back to business. Lee Dykes was one of the names that was mentioned, who's the technical director, I believe, or similar at Brentford. Anything in that? Could he join our Icelandic friend, or is that one not going to happen now? Do you think?
He has certainly been mentioned in dispatches, and there was more than one interview done. It wasn't that Steinson was the only candidate for this, but he is the one that Leeds have chosen for this specific role. If, like I say, they do decide that they want something a bit more overarching and they do want somebody more senior again to either oversee this or kind of, be in charge to an extent, then you do wonder if further appointment down the line might open the door for somebody else. He's done a good job, Lee Dykes at Brentford, and again is well thought of. But it is not the top man there by any stretch. They have a director of football as well. So one to watch and one to see how that develops. But for now, it's Steinson coming in the door.
Do you think what we've seen so far fits with the words we've heard from Parag Marate? That they're getting moving, they're trying to put a robust structure in place?
I would have said so, yeah. And a slightly different structure as well. I don't think they want the club to operate exactly as it has for the past 2 or 3 years. And I guess they have to be more mindful of making changes on the recruitment front than anywhere else, because that is what has done the most damage in the end. That's what hasn't worked. And I think the similar to this point has been a fairly damning indictment of what's been done in the transfer market over the past couple of years, the number of players who've gone on loan. In some cases, those loans the club would see them as strategic, a way of moving wages off the wage bill, a way of avoiding making transfers at a loss, which mean that you get hit in an FFP sense. But at the same time, they're not making any cash on these signings at all. It looks like everybody is moving on or will move on for a loss, give or take. I mean, you still have the possibility that Brendan Aronson has a great season at Union Berlin, so his value holds. But if he doesn't, it's hard to see Leeds recouping the kind of 25 million that was put up for him. Too many signings that haven't worked. And I think that will be a major, major priority for 49ers Enterprises, because that ultimately is what gets you out of the Championship and establishes you well in the Premier League.
I guess selling from a position of greater strength, if we were to get back up, would be helpful as well, when absorbing some losses on transfers maybe is not such a bad thing when you've got far more revenue coming in from the TV money in the Premier League.
Yeah, you can definitely cope. It's different financial world up there and has been for a long time now. And that is why I was saying about Ampadu. I think £7 million rising to £10 million is a pretty big splash in the Championship. It's not as if clubs don't from time to time go further than that. But I think expecting much more to be spent on individual players is asking a lot at this level.
Just to clear one thing up, there's been that story has emerged about Barcelona still owing 40 million for Rafinha. Can you just clarify that fee has been paid up front? Because as I understand it, my reading of it was that this was a story in Spain about how much they still owe from a financial fair play perspective, which is not actual money. It's how it shows up in their accounts. So they might have to account for £40 million worth of payments towards Rafinha in their accounts, but the money has already been paid. Two separate things.
I honestly can't answer that because I haven't checked it out yet. But all I can say is that there were quotes from Radrizzani back in August, September time, I think, which said that it had been sorted. And the indication from the club was that it would be paid up front by a set date. So I do need to look into that and we'll get back to you.
Nice one, Phil. Well, lovely to speak. We've got another show towards the back end of this week, and then we've got one at the start of next week, and then you're away for 10 days. So we'll hopefully be able to then get back together just before the Cardiff game, maybe even on the morning itself. We could do a live stream. That would be exciting.
Oh, wouldn't it just?
To start the season off. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your week. We look forward to it being a busy week. Is it going to be a busy week? Do you think there's going to be plenty more to follow Ampadu through the door?
I think it will start to pick up now, yeah. And now that they are in sole control and have full control of the club, there is really nothing stopping them beyond financial limits, But I don't think he'll be the last one coming in. I do think they'll carry on being active.
Lovely stuff, Phil. Right, we'll watch the week with interest. We'll catch up later in the week. See you soon.
The Square Ball Podcast.